Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the spaceship Starbound and looked at the alien world growing larger on the main screen. His hands were sweaty, and his heart beat fast in his chest. This was the biggest moment of his life. Earth had sent him to meet aliens for the first time in human history. "Captain, we're getting a message from the planet," said Lisa Chen from her seat at the communications panel. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the excitement under it. "They're speaking in their own language, but the computer is working on translating it." Jake nodded and walked over to stand behind her chair. The bridge was small and cramped. Only 4 people made up the whole diplomatic team. Besides himself and Lisa, there was Ryan Blake, their security chief, and Dr. Amy Foster, who studied alien life. All of them had trained for years for this moment. The alien planet was beautiful. It had purple oceans and silver mountains that sparkled in the light of 2 suns. Cities covered parts of the land like glowing jewels. The aliens who lived there called themselves Zephyrians, and they had built an empire that controlled many star systems. "Translation coming through now, sir," Lisa said. She pressed some buttons on her panel. "They're giving us permission to land. They want to meet us in something called the Crystal Palace." Ryan Blake looked up from checking his weapons. He was a big man with short hair and serious eyes. "Captain, should we go in armed? We don't know what these aliens want from us." Jake thought about it. Earth's leaders had told him to be careful but friendly. The Zephyrians were much more advanced than humans. Their ships were faster and their weapons were stronger. If they wanted to hurt humans, there was nothing Jake's small team could do to stop them. "We'll bring small weapons," Jake decided. "But keep them hidden. We're here to make friends, not start a war." Dr. Amy Foster looked excited as she stared at the planet. She was young and smart, with curly brown hair and bright eyes. "Just think about it," she said. "We're about to meet beings from another world. This will change everything for humanity." The Starbound landed at a spaceport near the biggest city on the planet. Jake had never seen anything like it. The buildings were made of some kind of crystal that changed colors in the sunlight. Strange plants with silver leaves grew everywhere. And the aliens, the Zephyrians, were tall and thin, almost like humans, but different in important ways. Their skin looked like it was made of tiny crystals that caught the light. They had large eyes that glowed with soft colors. When they moved, they seemed to float rather than walk. A group of Zephyrian guards met them at the ship. The guards wore armor that looked like it was made of liquid metal. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. But they seemed polite as they led the human team through the city. People, or rather aliens, stopped to stare at the humans as they walked by. Some pointed and made musical sounds that must have been their way of talking. Children, if they were children, hid behind. Adults and peeked out with curious eyes. The Crystal Palace was huge and beautiful. It was made entirely of different colored crystals that grew from the ground like giant flowers. Inside, the walls glowed with soft light, and strange music played from somewhere Jake couldn't see. They walked through long hallways filled with art and sculptures. Everything was smooth and curved, nothing like human buildings with their straight lines and sharp corners. Jake felt like he was walking through a dream. Finally, they came to a massive room with a high ceiling. At the far end was a throne made of pure white crystal, and on the throne sat the most beautiful being Jake had ever seen. Queen Valeth was tall even for a Zephyrian. Her skin was like diamonds, and her eyes changed color from blue to green to purple. She wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself. When she looked at the humans, Jake felt like she was looking right into his soul. "Welcome, visitors from Earth," the Queen said. Her voice was like music, and somehow Jake could understand her perfectly. "I am Queen Valeth, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. You have traveled very far to reach us." Jake stepped forward and tried to remember everything he had been taught about diplomacy. "Your Majesty, I am Captain Jake Morrison. We come from Earth in peace. We hope to build friendship between our peoples." The Queen smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Peace is a beautiful word, Captain Morrison. Let us see if our peoples can truly understand each other." What happened next would be talked about for years to come. The queen gestured to a small table beside her throne. On it sat a crystal unlike any Jake had ever seen. It was about the size of a baseball, and it seemed to contain a tiny galaxy inside it, with stars that moved and danced. "This is the crystal of eternal bonds," Queen Valeth explained. "It is the most sacred object in our empire. To show trust between our peoples, I invite you to touch it." Jake looked at his team. Lisa nodded encouragingly. Dr. Foster looked fascinated. Ryan looked worried, but he gave a small nod too. Jake walked slowly toward the crystal. The whole throne room had gone quiet. Hundreds of Zephyrian nobles watched, from the sides of the room. Jake could feel their eyes on him like physical weight. He reached out his hand toward the crystal. It felt warm as he got closer, and he could swear he heard it humming softly. The moment his finger touched its surface, everything changed. Light exploded through the room. Jake felt something rush into his mind, something alien and vast and ancient. For just a moment, he could feel emotions that weren't his own. Loneliness, sadness, hope, and something else, something warm and surprising. Then the guards moved. "He has violated the sacred crystal," one of them shouted in the musical Zephyrian language. "He must die for this crime." Energy weapons appeared in their hands, all pointed at Jake. The weapons charged up with a high whining sound. Jake's team reached for their own guns, but they were badly outnumbered. Jake stood frozen, still feeling strange from touching the crystal. He could hear Ryan shouting something, could see Lisa reaching for her communicator. Dr. Foster was backing away with her hands up. The guards raised their weapons. Jake closed his eyes and waited for the end. "Stop!" Queen Valeth's voice rang out like a bell. Every guard froze, every weapon lowered. The queen stood up from her throne, and her eyes were now glowing with bright white light. She looked at Jake for a long moment. Then she looked at her guards and nobles. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, and every word hit the room like a thunderbolt. "He is my husband." The silence in the throne room was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Every Zephyrian in the room stared at their queen with wide, glowing eyes. The guards still held their weapons, but they looked confused and scared. Jake felt like the ground had disappeared under his feet. "I'm sorry, what?" he managed to say. Queen Valeth looked at him with those changing eyes. Now they were a deep blue, like the ocean at night. "The crystal of eternal bonds does not lie, Jake Morrison. When you touched it, you became bound to me by laws older than our civilization." "Your Majesty," one of the nobles called out from the crowd. He was older than the others, with crystal skin that had turned silver with age. "Surely you cannot mean this. He is an alien. He does not understand our ways." The queen turned her gaze to the noble, and Jake saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. "Are you questioning the sacred crystal, Duke Zerion? Are you saying that our most holy relic is wrong?" The old noble stepped back and bowed his head. "No, Your Majesty. Of course not." Ryan Blake moved closer to Jake, his hand still near his weapon. "Captain, what do you want us to do?" Jake's mind was spinning. He could still feel something strange in his head, like someone else's thoughts were mixed up with his own. I don't know, Ryan. This wasn't in any of our training." "Queen." Valeth clapped her hands twice and the guards put their weapons away. "Captain Morrison and his team will be given rooms in the royal wing of the palace. They are to be treated as honored guests." "But Your Majesty," another noble protested, "the laws about the crystal—" "The laws are clear," the queen said firmly. "The crystal has chosen. Captain Morrison is now my consort according to our most ancient traditions. Anyone who harms him or his people will answer to me personally." More murmurs ran through the crowd of nobles. Jake could tell that not everyone was happy about this turn of events. Some looked angry, others looked worried. A few seemed curious. Guards led Jake and his team through more crystal hallways to a set of beautiful rooms. The walls were clear crystal that showed the city outside. The furniture looked like it was grown rather than built. Everything curved and flowed like water that had been frozen in place. "This is insane," Ryan said as soon as the guards left. "Them alone." "Captain, we need to get out of here. This is way beyond what we signed up for. Lisa Chen was already trying to contact their ship. I can't get through to the Starbound. Something is blocking our communications. Dr. Amy Foster was looking around the room with wonder. Incredible. Look at how they've grown these crystals into exact shapes. The technology must be… Amy, Jake interrupted. Focus, we have a bigger problem right now. But Jake was having trouble focusing himself. The strange feeling in his head was getting stronger. Sometimes he thought he could hear music that wasn't there. Sometimes he felt emotions that didn't seem to be his own. A soft chime sounded, and part of the crystal wall simply melted away to create a door. A Zephyrian walked in, but this one was different from the guards or nobles. She wore simple robes and moved quietly. I am Lyra, servant to Queen Valeth, she said in perfect English. The Queen wishes to speak with Captain Morrison alone. Jake looked at his team. I guess I don't have much choice. Be careful, sir, Ryan said quietly. Lyra led Jake through more halls to a smaller room that looked like a garden made of crystal. Crystal trees grew toward the ceiling, and crystal flowers bloomed with soft light. Queen Valeth was waiting there, sitting on a bench beside a fountain that flowed with liquid light instead of water. Please sit, Jake, she said, and her voice was gentler now than it had been in the throne room. Jake sat down carefully, trying to keep some distance between them. Your Majesty, I think there's been some kind of mistake. I just touched the crystal because you asked me to. I didn't know. I know you didn't know, she said sadly. How could you? Your people have never seen anything like the crystal of eternal bonds. What exactly did it do to me? Jake asked. I keep feeling strange, like there's something else in my head. Queen Valeth was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, she sounded very tired. The crystal creates a connection between souls, Jake. A bond that cannot be broken. In our culture, this bond is more sacred than any marriage ceremony your people might have. But I don't understand how it works, Jake said. Are you saying I can read your mind now? Not your mind exactly, she replied. Your emotions, your deepest feelings. And you can feel mine, though you may not recognize them yet. Jake thought about the strange emotions he had been feeling. The sadness. The loneliness. Those weren't my feelings in the throne room. No, Queen Valeth said softly. They were mine. She stood up and walked to the crystal fountain. I have ruled my people for 300 of your years, Jake Morrison. In all that time I have been alone. Queens of my people do not marry for love. We marry for politics, for alliances between noble houses, but the crystal chooses based on the heart. Why me? Jake asked. I'm just a human. I'm not even from your world. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were now a warm, golden color. When you touched the crystal, I felt your thoughts for just a moment. I felt your desire for peace between our peoples. I felt your willingness to sacrifice yourself to protect your friends. I felt your loneliness, so much like my own. Jake didn't know what to say to that. The idea that an alien queen could understand him better than most humans was hard to believe. There's something else you should know, Queen Valeth continued. Some of my nobles are not happy about this bond. They see it as a sign of weakness. Duke Zarian, who spoke in the throne room, has been trying to remove me from power for years. Remove you? Jake asked, alarmed. You mean kill you? Among my people, a ruler who shows weakness can be challenged, she explained. They will say that bonding with an alien makes me unfit to rule. Jake felt a flash of anger that he didn't expect. The idea of anyone hurting this beautiful, sad alien queen made his blood boil. Then he realized the anger felt stronger than it should have, and he wondered if some of it was coming from her through their bond. What can we do about it? He asked. She looked surprised. We? You would help me keep my throne? Your Majesty. Valeth, Jake said, using her name for the first time. I may not understand what's happened to us, but I can tell you're a good ruler who cares about her people. If there are others who want to hurt you, then yes, I'll help. For the first time since he had met her, Queen Valeth smiled a real smile. It was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once. "There is something else," she said. "The bond works both ways. You will begin to develop some of our abilities, enhanced senses, the ability to feel the emotions of others. It may be strange for you." As if her words had triggered something, Jake suddenly felt a rush of new sensations. He could hear conversations happening in other parts of the palace. He could smell things more clearly than ever before. And he could feel the emotions of people nearby like warm or cold spots in his mind. "This is going to take some getting used to," he said, holding his head. "I will help you learn to control it," Queen Valith promised. "But Jake, you must know that this bond cannot be undone. We are connected now for the rest of our lives." Jake looked at her sitting there in the crystal garden, beautiful and powerful and alone. He thought about Earth and his old life. Then he thought about the sadness he had felt from her, and the hope that was growing in her now. "Then I guess we better figure out how to make this work," he said. Outside the crystal walls, neither of them noticed Duke Zarian walking by with several other nobles, their faces dark with anger and their eyes full of dangerous plans. 3 days had passed since Jake touched the crystal, and he was starting to understand just how much trouble they were all in. The enhanced senses that came with the bond were overwhelming at first, but Queen Valith had been teaching him to control them during their daily meetings. He was sitting in the crystal garden with her when the first sign of danger came. Jake suddenly felt a spike of fear and anger through the bond, emotions so strong they weren't his own. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing Valith's eyes flash bright red. "Duke Zarian is meeting with the other nobles again," she said quietly. "They're planning something. I can feel their hostility even from here." Jake had learned that Zephyrians could sense emotions from much further away than humans. It was part of their natural abilities, made stronger by centuries of evolution. Through the bond, he was starting to develop the same skill. "Maybe we should tell my team," Jake suggested. "Ryan has military training. He might be able to help." But before Valith could answer, Lyra came running into the garden. The servant looked scared, her crystal skin flickering between colors rapidly. "Your Majesty," she gasped. "Duke Zarian's guards have captured the human visitors. They're being held in the lower levels of the palace." Jake jumped to his feet. "What? Why would he do that?" "As leverage," Queen Valith said grimly, her eyes now glowing bright white with anger. "If he can't challenge me directly, he'll force me to give up my throne to save your friends." Jake felt fury burning in his chest, and he wasn't sure if it was his anger or hers. "We have to get them back." "It's not that simple," Valith said. "Zarian has many supporters among the noble houses. If I attack him directly, it could start a civil war that would destroy our empire." Jake closed his eyes and tried to think. Back on Earth, he had been trained in military tactics and strategy. What if we don't attack him directly? What if we make him come to us? Before Valith could ask what he meant, alarm sounds began echoing through the palace. The crystal walls started flashing red, and Jake could hear guards running in the hallways. Outside. "What's happening?" Jake asked. Lyra looked terrified. "The Duke's forces are moving through the palace. They're claiming that the Queen has been contaminated by alien influence and is no longer fit to rule." "A coup," Jake realized. "He's making his move now." Queen Valith stood up, and suddenly she looked every bit the powerful ruler she was meant to be. Her crystal skin began to glow with inner light, and the air around her seemed to shimmer with energy. "If Zarian wants a fight, then he'll get one," she said. "But first, we need to rescue your team." Jake could feel the bond between them pulsing, with shared determination. "I'm coming with you." "Jake, you're not trained for combat." "Maybe not Zephyrian combat," he interrupted. "But I know how humans fight. And I'm not letting my friends die because of something I started." They moved quickly through the crystal hallways, avoiding the main corridors where fighting had already started. Jake was amazed at how much his senses had improved. He could hear guards moving 3 floors away and smell the ozone scent of energy, weapons being fired. As they got closer to the lower levels, Jake started picking up familiar emotions through the bond. Ryan's steady determination, Lisa's focused calm, Amy's scientific curiosity even in the face of danger. They're alive, he told Valeth. I can feel them. They found Jake's team locked in a crystal cell that hummed with energy barriers. Ryan was testing the walls for weak spots while Lisa worked on some kind of communication device she had built from parts of her translator. Amy was taking notes on the crystal structure even while imprisoned. "Captain!" Ryan called out when he saw them. "Are you all right? We heard fighting upstairs. Duke Zarian is trying to overthrow the Queen," Jake explained quickly. "We're getting you out of here." Queen Valeth placed her hands on the crystal walls of the cell. Her skin glowed brighter, and the energy barriers began to flicker and fade. "How did you do that?" Amy asked in fascination as the cell door dissolved. "Royal override codes built into all palace crystals," Valeth explained. "But we need to move quickly. Zarian's forces will have detected this." As if to prove her point, the sound of boots running toward them echoed down the hallway. Jake counted at least a dozen guards, all armed with energy weapons. "This way," Valeth said, leading them down a side corridor. But more guards appeared, at the other end, trapping them in the middle. "Surrender," one of the guards called out. "By order of Duke Zarian, you are all under arrest for treason against the Zephyrian Empire." Jake looked at his team. Ryan had his small sidearm out, but it would be useless against Zephyrian armor. Lisa was holding some kind of device she had been working on. Amy looked scared but determined. Then Jake had an idea. Through the bond, he could feel Valeth's tactical knowledge, centuries of experience with palace defenses and guard rotations. But she could also feel his human military training, his knowledge of improvised warfare and unconventional tactics. "Trust me," he whispered to her. Jake stepped forward, his hands raised as if surrendering. "Wait," he called to the guards. "Before you arrest us, don't you want to know why the crystal chose me?" The guards hesitated. Jake could feel their curiosity through his enhanced senses. The crystal of eternal bonds doesn't make mistakes. Jake continued, walking slowly toward the nearest group of guards. "It chose me because it saw something in my mind. It saw human ways of fighting that your people have never seen before." One of the guards laughed. "What could a primitive alien teach us about combat?" "This," Jake said. He dove to the side just as Ryan threw one of his flashbang grenades down the hallway. The corridor filled with blinding light and deafening sound. Zephyrian senses were much more sensitive than human ones, and the guards were completely stunned. Queen Valeth acted instantly, using her royal access to shut down the lighting in this section of the palace. In the darkness that followed, Jake's team moved with the precision of trained soldiers while the Zephyrian guard stumbled around blind and deaf. "Follow me," Valeth whispered, her voice coming through the bond directly into Jake's mind. They moved through the dark corridors like ghosts. Jake was amazed at how well the bond worked for coordination. He could feel exactly where Valeth was and what she was planning, while she could sense his tactical suggestions and adapt to them instantly. They made it to a secure section of the palace where loyal guards were still holding position. These guards looked surprised to see their queen moving with such military precision alongside the human team. "Your Majesty," the guard captain said, "Duke Zarian's forces control most of the palace. He's declared himself regent until a new ruler can be chosen. Then it's time to show him what happens when someone threatens my people," Queen Valeth replied. Her eyes were now glowing bright gold, and Jake could feel her royal anger burning through the bond. "What's the plan?" Ryan asked, checking his remaining weapons. Jake looked at Valeth, and through the bond they shared an understanding that went beyond words. Human tactics combined with Zephyrian technology. Earth military strategy guided by centuries of alien political knowledge. "We take back the throne room," Jake said. "But we do it the human way." "What's the human way?" asked the guard captain. Jake smiled grimly. "We cheat." Through the bond, he could feel Queen Valeth's approval and something that might have been love. Together, human and alien, they began planning their counterattack. Outside, Duke Zarian's forces controlled the palace, but they had never faced anything like human military ingenuity guided by alien insight. They were about to learn why the Crystal of Eternal Bonds had chosen Jake Morrison. The counterattack worked better than anyone had expected. Using human guerrilla tactics combined with Queen Valeth's knowledge of the palace systems, they managed to retake the throne room in less than 2 hours. Duke Zarian and his main supporters were captured, though some of his allies had escaped to other parts of the empire. Jake sat in the Crystal Garden, still recovering from the energy blast that had nearly killed him during the final assault. He had thrown himself between Queen Valeth and an assassin's weapon, taking the full force of the energy beam across his chest. The Zephyrian medical technology had saved his life, but he still felt weak. "You were stupid to do that," Valeth said, but her voice was gentle. She sat beside him on the crystal bench, and Jake could feel her worry and gratitude through the bond. "I couldn't let him hurt you," Jake replied simply. "The bond doesn't force you to sacrifice yourself for me, Jake. That was your choice." Thought about that for a moment. Over the past week, he had been wondering how much of what he felt for Valeth was real, and how much was just the alien crystal affecting his mind. "I've been thinking about the bond," he said. "About whether what we feel for each other is genuine or just some kind of alien magic." Queen Valeth's eyes shifted to a soft blue color. "I have wondered the same thing. In our culture, bonds created by the crystal are considered sacred because they're supposed to reveal true compatibility between souls. But you're not Zephyrian. Perhaps the crystal made a mistake." "There's a way to find out," Jake said, remembering something Amy had discovered in her research. "Your archives mention an ancient ritual, one that can break the bond." Valeth's crystal skin flickered between colors, showing her surprise. "The ritual of severance. But Jake, it's extremely dangerous. It could kill us both. But if we survive, it will know if what we feel is real," he said. "I don't want you to be with me just because some crystal decided we should be together. And I don't want to stay here if I'm only feeling artificial emotions." Before Valeth could respond, Lyra appeared at the entrance to the garden. "Your Majesty, the Noble Council is here to see you. They're not happy." The throne room was full of tension when Jake and Valeth entered. About 30 Zephyrian nobles stood in formal groups, their crystal skin showing various shades of disapproval and concern. At the front stood an elderly noble Jake hadn't seen before. "Your Majesty," the elder said with a formal bow, "I am Lord Kalin, Speaker for the Noble Council. We come to discuss the situation with your consort." "What situation?" Queen Valeth asked, though Jake could feel through the bond that she already knew what was coming. "While we acknowledge that the Crystal of Eternal Bonds chose this human," Lord Kalin said carefully, "many of us question whether he is truly worthy to stand beside the ruler of our empire." Jake stepped forward. "What exactly are you saying?" "We're saying that touching a crystal doesn't make you qualified to be our queen's husband," another noble called out. "You know nothing of our culture, our history, our ways. How can you help rule an empire you don't understand?" Jake could feel Valeth's anger rising through the bond, but he held up a hand to stop her from speaking. "What would it take to prove my worth to you?" The nobles exchanged glances. Lord Kalin spoke again. "There is an ancient tradition, the trial of worthiness. 3 tests that prove a potential consort is capable of standing beside our ruler." "What kind of tests?" Jake asked. "The test of wisdom," Lord Kalin explained. "You would have to solve the riddle of depths, which has stumped our greatest scholars for 1,000 years. Jake nodded. That didn't sound too bad. "The test of courage. You would face the void beast in single combat." That sounded much worse. Jake had heard the palace guards talking about void beasts. They were creatures from the deep caves under the planet, things with too many teeth and the ability to phase in and out of reality. And the test of understanding. You would have to mediate a real dispute between our noble houses using Zephyrian law and custom. Jake looked at Queen Valeth. Through the bond, he could feel her concern for his safety, but also her curiosity about what he would choose to do. "If I pass these tests," Jake said, "will you accept me as your queen's consort?" "If you pass all 3 tests," Lord Kalin confirmed, "we will acknowledge that the crystal chose wisely." And if I fail? Then you will leave our world and never return, another noble said. And our queen will choose a proper Zephyrian husband. Jake felt a flash of possessive anger from Valeth through the bond, but she kept her expression calm. Jake, she said quietly, you don't have to do this. I am still your queen regardless of what they think. I know, Jake said, but I want to do this. Not to prove myself to them, but to prove something to myself. The first test began the next. Dorsey Jake was brought to the ancient library of depths, a massive crystal chamber filled with floating books and scrolls that glowed with soft light. Hundreds of Zephyrian scholars had tried to solve the riddle of depths over the centuries. Lord Kalen read the riddle aloud. I am born in silence, but speak with thunder. I am lighter than air, but can crush mountains. I am everywhere and nowhere, everything and nothing. What am I? Jake sat in the center of the library, surrounded by floating books that contained thousands of years of failed attempts to solve the riddle. The Zephyrian scholars had approached it logically, mathematically, philosophically. They had tried to find answers in science and religion and ancient wisdom. But Jake was human. He thought differently. He remembered something from his childhood, a simple riddle his grandfather had told him. Sometimes the most complex questions had the simplest answers. Thoughts, he said suddenly. The library fell silent. Lord Kalen looked surprised. Explain your reasoning. Thoughts are born in the silence of the mind but can speak with the thunder of action, Jake said. They weigh nothing but can move mountains when they inspire people to act. They're everywhere because every thinking being has them, and nowhere because you can't touch or see them. They're everything because they shape our reality, and nothing because they don't exist in the physical world. The ancient crystal that recorded the riddle began to glow brighter and brighter until it filled the entire library with warm light. After 1,000 years, the riddle of depths had finally been solved. The second test was held in the combat arena beneath the palace. The void beast was brought up from the deep caves in a crystal cage that flickered in and out of visibility, as the creature inside phased between dimensions. Jake stood in the center of the arena with only basic Zephyrian armor and an energy sword he barely knew how to use. The beast was released and Jake got his first good look at it. It was like a nightmare made real. 10 feet tall, covered in black scales that seemed to absorb light, with 6 arms ending in claws and a mouth full of teeth like crystal daggers. When it moved, parts of it would disappear and reappear somewhere else. The beast lunged at Jake, its claws passing through the space where he had been standing a split second before. Jake had learned to trust his enhanced senses, and they were, screaming warnings at him faster than his conscious mind could process. But Jake didn't try to fight the beast the way a Zephyrian would. Instead, he used human tactics. He ran. He hid. He made the beast chase him around the arena while he studied its movement patterns. The Zephyrians watching looked disgusted by his apparent cowardice, but Queen Valeth smiled. Through the bond, she could feel his tactical mind working. After 10 minutes of running and dodging, Jake finally acted. When the beast phased out to reappear behind him, Jake was ready. He had figured out that there was a split-second delay when it re-entered normal space. In that moment, it was solid and vulnerable. Jake spun around and drove his energy sword straight into the beast's heart just as it materialized. The creature let out a shriek that shattered several crystal viewing screens, then collapsed. The third test was held the next day in the Hall of Justice. A real dispute was brought before Jake, a complex matter involving trade rights between 3 different noble houses. The case had been going on for months, with each side citing different ancient laws and precedents. Jake listened to all 3 sides present their cases. The Zephyrian legal system was incredibly complex, full of traditions and rituals that went back thousands of years. Any Zephyrian judge would need weeks to study all the relevant laws and precedents. But Jake didn't approach it like a Zephyrian judge. He approached it like a human negotiator. You're all right, he said finally, and you're all wrong. The nobles looked confused. You're fighting over trade routes and ancient agreements, Jake continued, but you're forgetting the most important thing. You're all Zephyrians. You're all part of the same empire. Instead of fighting each other, why don't you work together? Jake proposed a solution that none of them had considered. Instead of competing for the same trade routes, they could combine their resources and establish new routes that would benefit all three houses. It wasn't traditional, but it was fair and practical. The three nobles looked at each other, then began discussing Jake's proposal. Within an hour, they had reached an agreement that satisfied everyone. Lord Kalen stood up in the Hall of Justice. "You have passed all three tests," he announced. "You solved our ancient riddle with simple human wisdom. You defeated our most dangerous beast with human cunning. And the ritual of severance took place at dawn in the most sacred chamber of the Crystal Palace." Jake and Queen Valeth stood in the center of a circle made from pieces of the original crystal of eternal bonds. Ancient symbols glowed on the walls, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with power. Jake's team stood watching with dozens of Zephyrian nobles and priests. Everyone looked worried. The ritual had not been performed in over 500 years, and the last two people who attempted it had died. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan asked Jake quietly before the ceremony began. "No," Jake admitted. "But I need to know if what I feel for her is real, and she needs to know too." Dr. Amy Foster had spent days studying the ritual in the ancient archives. "The process will break the psychic connection created by the crystal," she explained. "But the shock to both your nervous systems could be fatal." "We understand the risks," Queen Valeth said. Her voice was calm, but Jake could feel her fear through the bond they were about to sever. The high priest began chanting in the old Zephyrian language. The crystal fragments around Jake and Valeth started glowing brighter and brighter. Jake could feel the bond between them pulsing like a heartbeat. "Jake," Valeth said softly, "whatever happens, I want you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Jake replied, taking her hand. The chanting reached a crescendo, and suddenly Jake felt like his soul was being torn in half. Pain beyond anything he had ever experienced shot through his entire body. Through the bond, he could feel that Valeth was experiencing the same agony. The crystal fragments exploded with light so bright that everyone in the chamber had to shield their eyes. Jake felt the psychic connection between him and Valeth stretching, straining, and then snap. The silence that followed was complete. Jake couldn't feel Valeth's emotions anymore. The constant background hum of her thoughts was gone. For the first time in weeks, his mind was entirely his own again. He looked at Valeth, who was staring at him with wide eyes. Without the bond, she seemed almost like a stranger, beautiful, alien, and distant. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. Jake considered the question carefully. Without the artificial connection, did he still care about this alien queen? Did he still want to stay on her world and help her rule? The answer came to him clearly. "I feel—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I feel like I want to get to know you all over again. The real you, not the version I knew through the bond." Valeth smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I was hoping you would say something like that." Jake stepped closer to her. "Your Majesty, Valeth, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not as bonded consorts, but as friends who might become something more?" "I would like that very much," she replied. The chamber erupted in cheers from both humans and Zephyrians. Lord Kalen stepped forward, his crystal skin glowing with approval. "The ritual has proven what the crystal knew all along," he announced. "Your connection was real, not just magical compulsion." Over the following weeks, Jake and Valeth began what Jake thought of as their real courtship. Without the bond forcing them to understand each other, they had to learn to communicate the old-fashioned way. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both were natural leaders who put their people's welfare first. Both enjoyed solving complex problems and finding creative solutions. Both had a sense of humor that transcended species barriers. And both were fascinated by the differences between human and Zephyrian cultures. Jake's team became deeply involved in establishing formal relations between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire. Lisa Chen worked with Zephyrian communication specialists to create better translation systems. Ryan Blake helped train combined human Zephyrian security forces. Dr. Amy Foster established the first Interspecies Research Institute, studying how human and Zephyrian biology could complement each other. The breakthrough came when Amy discovered that Zephyrian crystal technology could be grown using human emotional patterns as a template. Meanwhile, human creativity and adaptability could help Zephyrians develop new applications for their ancient technologies. "It's amazing," Amy reported to Jake one evening. "Our species aren't just compatible, we're complementary. Humans provide innovation and emotional depth, while Zephyrians provide stability and advanced knowledge. Together we could accomplish things neither species could achieve alone." 3 months after the ritual of severance, Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. He asked Queen Valeth to marry him properly, with both human and Zephyrian ceremonies. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once we're married, there's no going back. You'll be giving up your old life on Earth forever." Jake thought about Earth, about the life he had left behind. Then he looked at Valeth, at the Crystal City, beyond the palace windows, at the future they could build together. "I'm not giving up my old life," he said. "I'm starting a new one, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather start it with." The wedding ceremony took place 6 months later and was attended by representatives from both worlds. Jake wore a traditional human tuxedo combined with Zephyrian ceremonial crystals. Valeth wore a dress that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. The human part of the ceremony was officiated by the captain of the newest Earth ship to arrive at the Zephyrian homeworld. The Zephyrian part was conducted by the High Priest in the same chamber where they had broken their artificial bond. "By the authority granted to me by Earth Command," the human captain said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. By the ancient laws of our people and the blessing of the crystals," the High Priest added in the musical Zephyrian language, "you are now bonded in marriage." Jake kissed his new wife as representatives of 2 species cheered around them. It was, he thought, probably the strangest wedding in the history of either world. The years that followed were full of challenges and triumphs. Jake learned to rule, alongside Valeth, bringing human perspectives to Zephyrian politics while learning to appreciate the wisdom of their ancient traditions. The alliance between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire opened up new possibilities for both civilizations. Human colonies were established on Zephyrian worlds, while Zephyrian crystal cities were built in Earth's solar system. Trade flourished. Technology, advanced, and art and culture were exchanged freely between the species. Jake never regretted his decision to stay. On quiet evenings, he and Valeth would sit in their crystal garden and watch the stars, where human and Zephyrian ships traveled, together as allies and friends. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't touched the crystal that first day?" Valeth asked one evening. Jake considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I think about everything we've built together. The alliance between our peoples, the scientific advances, the cultural exchange, the peace we've created." "And us?" Valeth asked with a smile. Jake took her hand, marveling as he always did at the way her crystal skin caught the light. "Especially us. The crystal may have brought us together, but we chose to stay together. That makes all the difference." 5 years after first contact, Jake stood in the throne room where everything had begun, welcoming a new delegation from Earth. His daughter, the first half-human, half-Zephyrian child ever born, played at his feet. She had her mother's crystal skin but her father's brown eyes, and she could speak both languages fluently. "Your Majesty," the Earth delegation leader said formally, "we bring greetings from the President of Earth and a proposal for expanding our joint exploration program." Jake smiled. The formal title still sounded strange to his ears, but he had grown into the role of Prince Consort. "Welcome to the Crystal Palace," he replied. "Queen Valeth and I look forward to hearing your proposals." Later that night, as he tucked his daughter into her crystal bed and sang her a human lullaby that she translated into Zephyrian for fun, Jake reflected on the strange path his life had taken. He had come to this world as an explorer and diplomat. He had become a husband, a father, and a bridge between 2 civilizations. The scared young captain who had touched an alien crystal was gone. replaced by a man who had learned that the greatest adventures were the ones that changed you forever. Outside the palace windows, human and Zephyrian ships moved among the stars, like points of light in the darkness, carrying the hopes and dreams of two species united by understanding, friendship, and love. And in the crystal garden where it all began, a new crystal was growing, one that would record this story for future generations of both species to remember. The story of how a simple touch had changed the fate of two worlds, and how love had proved stronger than the bonds that created it.